ask us to look at creating a humanitarian assistance and disaster relief kind of force, for lack of a better word. But not a military force or a security element, but really highly trained folks that could deploy to austere environments, even hostile environments, to provide medical support, logistics, when it comes to critical food aid, clean water, power, those kind of things.
I like things that are small, agile, flexible, and where you can still ideate and iterate and think about a problem, which is what Fogbow has done. Go somewhere austere, figure out the problem, design a solution that works for the local people with the local people, and then make life better for those people. And I really enjoy that. So that is meaningful work.
Is that much of it? That's not much of a change for you, right?
My name is Carey. I used to load bombs in the Air Force, and now I'm a writer, a filmmaker, and an entrepreneur. Through using the post-9/11 GI Bill to go to college, working hourly jobs to pay the bills, and freelancing my way into a career, I've studied what it takes to successfully transition from service to civilian, and that study has become a conversation. On this podcast, I speak to other veterans, successful artists and entrepreneurs about their transition, what they did well, where they failed, what they learned, and most importantly, how they applied their skills. Episode 110 features Worth Parker, a retired Marine, and Mick Mulroy, a Marine Corps veteran, as well as a retired Paramilitary Operations Officer in the CIA, and Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, where he served under General Mattis. Mick co-founded the Lobo Institute and Fogbow, where he and Worth both work to combine the efforts of military veterans with humanitarians in austere areas of conflict and environmental disasters to help those who need it most. Welcome. This is Veteran Made. This episode is brought to you by GoPills, a nootropic that gives your brain neurotransmitter support both acutely and over time. Those of us that served in the military, regardless of where we served and in what capacity we served, all came into contact with different chemicals, different percussions, and various elements of our environments that have affected our brain's ability to function. Think about your brain's performance and your mental health right now, yes, but think about your future too. We have so much more control over our long-term health than we realize. Visit gopills.com and use code VM15 at checkout for 15% off. That's VM15 for 15% off. Give your brain the neurotransmitter support it needs to perform well right now and over time.
All right. Good morning from 3 different states for all of us. Mick Mulroy and Worth Parker, welcome to Veteran Made.
Thanks much.
Absolutely. Worth, welcome back. Mick, welcome for the first time. Excited to have this conversation. Worth, to start with you. If you could just remind folks, brief primer on who you are and when you served, and Mick, we'll kick it over to you, and then we'll jump in.
Yeah, sure. I'm pretty much now a full-time writer, although I've been blessed to be working with Mick for the better part of 6 or 8 months now with Fogbow, which we'll get into. I'm a retired Marine officer. I was a Marine for a total of 27 years. About 6 of that was reservists and another 22 roughly active service. I retired in 2021. Mick and I immediately kind of fell into the Kabul evacuation together, and we're continuing to kind of do things along the humanitarian line.
Awesome. Mick?
Yeah, so former Marine, retired from the reserves. I was in the CIA for 20 plus years in what's called the Special Activities Center, at least that's what it's called now, which is the Special Operations Group inside the CIA, air, ground, maritime. And I did that for a career. And then when I got out, on the way to Montana, while I was waiting for my now business partner to get out of the Navy, had the privilege of serving as Secretary Mattis's deputy for the Middle East, and then Secretary Esper when he took over. And then after that, we started what's called Lobo Institute, which Worth is also a part of, and I've known Worth for over 20 years, which the whole concept of Lobo Institute is to take, military veterans and CIA veterans, particularly for my group, SAC, and also humanitarians, right? So people that served in the UN, Peace Corps, et cetera, put them together to try to do good in areas of conflict where we could bring our skills such. And then from there, we got hired into Fogbow, which I know we're talking about today, but ultimately it's that concept. It's getting people that have these skill sets that put to use in other areas, in this case, humanitarian efforts.
I love it. Yeah, as we were talking a bit offline, kind of preparing for this, one thing that has me excited about this episode, well, the thing that has me excited about this episode is how much I've encountered, you know, contracting and getting out of the military and serving in a special operations capacity, and then jumping right back into the fray through contracting, right? And those are opportunities that pay really well, but those are opportunities that are in some cases quite a bit more dangerous than when folks were serving. And so there's a lot of disconnect between veterans, and specifically soft veterans, and that idea as we fought this war for over 20 years. It got difficult for a lot of folks. And so there are people like me who, you know, served on a flight line capacity, knew what they wanted to do, knew what they wanted to use the GI Bill for, and got out and went to school and studied that and grinded through for a career. And I'm very blessed and very lucky that that kind of purpose was actually instilled in me before the military. And it's one of the reasons I did join the military, was to get some experience and skills to then pivot back to this thing that I knew that I wanted to do. But there are a lot of folks who are not like that and don't have those opportunities and don't have those privileges. And so they serve and then they get out and they're trying to figure out, okay, well, what's next? Well, these are the skills that I have. Where can I apply those skills? Oh, as a contractor, or, you know, with a different agency or organization. So what I love about what you're describing, and I'd love for you to just jump in and tell us what it is, what Fogbow is, and how you brought those folks together. But just to ground the conversation for the audience, we want to talk about, there are more opportunities for you out there where you still can serve. Not just this country, but also, you know, folks around the world that are less fortunate than us. So what is Fogbow and how did it get started?
Sure. And if I could, Carey, if I could just start with, I'm not saying that veterans shouldn't be contractors, just to start with
Sure.
that, right?
Absolutely.
We have a lot of missions inside the government that require the skills of former military soft folks, and they really are continuing their service, in my opinion. So it isn't an either or, but this is an option, I think, and it's an option that I would hope that more veterans would consider. So Fogbow is essentially, when they came to us, Worth included, and you might expect there's a lot of Marines and SEALs in our group. They asked us to look at creating humanitarian assistance and disaster relief kind of force, for lack of a better word, but not a military force or a security element, but really highly trained folks that could deploy to austere environments, even hostile environments, to provide medical support, logistics, you know, when it comes to critical food aid, clean water, power, those kind of things. And obviously that's a big endeavor, but the intent was that we would create this standing element that the UN could then use. We got into the planning, got pretty far into it, and then the war in Gaza started. So they asked us to shift and really look at what we could do there. And the reason for bringing up the preponderance of Marines and SEALs is we came up with the Maritime Corridor, essentially. Before the U.S. even decided to dedicate the floating pier, you know, the JLOTS, Joint Logistics Over the Shore system. So that's where we took our skills, our military skills and intelligence skills, but we also, again, have humanitarians, both from the UN side and for the private charities on our team. It's a very small advisory team. We deployed over there. We assisted with the JLOTS because once it was coming, then, you know, we needed to make use of it. And I know there's, you know, criticism of it, but I would say it delivered over 30 million pounds of food into a place that needed it. So I would only caution that, you know, a lot of people talk about problems, but the U.S. military pushed a pier from Virginia and put it off the coast of Gaza, right? So I mean, I'm not biased, but I also think that deserves a little credit rather than just criticism. And yes, it was expensive, but nobody ever calculates how much it costs to keep an aircraft carrier strike group off the coast of Israel. But for some reason, they're obsessed about the cost of the JLOT. But anyway, so no sour grapes there. But anyway, that's kind of, and we helped with that, right? We were physically, you know, pushing the JLOTs back and forth to keep it in safe harbor during periods of high weather concerns, wave heights, etc. And we collectively put about 1,100 tons of food, Fogbow did, into Gaza, in addition to helping with the system, the JLOT system. And now we are working to do more inside Gaza to help the humanitarian side and hopefully get this maritime corridor back up and running. But I'll stop there. I'd like to hand it over to Worth to talk a little bit about his view of how this got started and why we're doing what we're doing.
I mean, I would mostly echo, well, I would entirely echo Mick, but I would also say, what I like, if we're going to talk about transition, and it's the thing I figured out when I was still in uniform. I got psych screened 3 times over the course of service, twice by US SOCOM and once by Mick's old organization. And every time the psychologist said to me, you fit a very standard archetype, which is you don't love a lot of rules, but you're willing to subsume yourself to a group and to a rule set in order to achieve goals of something bigger than you. And what I really enjoy in that process, and a thing I figured out in Iraq in 2004 and 5, was I like the world when the paint is still wet or the cement is still wet, whatever the analogy is, and things haven't really firmed up. I remember on my way out of Al Asad Air Base in 2005, they were pouring the footings for a Jack in the Box. And I thought, this is not my scene anymore. And so I like things that are small, agile, flexible, and where you can still ideate and iterate and think about a problem, which is what Fogbow has done for the last, really a few years, as Mick alluded to, but hardcore since the Gaza war started. And it's the ability for, again, a handful, less than a squad's worth of human beings to start coming up with plans and ideas and seeking resources in a way that can then deliver impact that has meaning for desperate people. And so that outsized impact thing, what is that? That's really the definition of what SOF is supposed to do anyway. Go somewhere austere, figure out the problem, design a solution that works for the local people with the local people, and then make life better for those people. And I really enjoy that. So that is meaningful work.
It's funny you mentioned the Jack in the Box, because I went to Bagram in Afghanistan twice, only about 18 months apart. I absolutely loved my first deployment there because it was a little bit more austere. Again, still Bagram, but 18 months later, it was a thriving city, and it was not the most enjoyable deployment, because kind of like, what are we doing here? Just flying sorties, kind of on a regular cadence here. And it's the purpose thing is interesting too, because I remember when I got out of the Air Force, our fighter squadron was the one that went to Libya, and it was one of these instances where I was a civilian and had separated, and I was paying attention to these things that were happening just in the world, because I like to pay attention to things. And then in particular with these conflicts, because of, my former brothers and sisters that are serving, and kind of regardless of the politics of that situation, I very desperately missed loading those bombs that were dropped there in real time, right? Like that was, regardless of how you feel about the politics of any given situation, you want to do your job when it matters and when there are stakes. And so I think that separation or retirement from the military is that initial period is a very interesting one, because you're looking back while folks are still in conflict doing the job, and you left the job for a reason, but you still miss that purpose that's associated with those tasks, right? Yes, the strategy, but definitely more the tactics of like, hey, there's a person who would have been me filling that slot, loading those bombs, and getting that job done. And that was a really difficult thing for me to wrestle with initially coming out of the military. And obviously a different capacity than a soft capacity, but still a small unit, and still, kind of working in a very quick and dangerous environment. And then Mick, I do also just want to acknowledge, you're absolutely right. I'm not, it's not binary. I'm not saying it's an either or thing. This is about providing options, and for folks to think about what their options are as they separate, or as they've been separated or retired, and think, hey, I want to get back into something in some capacity. And it's an interesting one. I do not want to get into politics, but we are describing environments that have sort of repercussions, I guess is the wrong word, but we're in a highly politicized environment, and military members feel strongly across that spectrum. And so some get nervous about, well, I don't want to get into this because I don't want to be associated with that. But it sounds like what you're providing is straight up service to people who need it in environments where our folks can thrive.
I think that's exactly right, Carey. And to put it frankly, and I did see this from the Pentagon perspective. Whenever there's a major crisis in the world that's really difficult, it's almost always the U.S. military that responds. Whether it's flying helicopters into the mountains of Pakistan or going to Bangladesh because of the flood or something. So the skill sets are there. I mean, expeditionary logistics. Who does that better than the U.S. military? There's nobody probably in history. So that skill set and just the military mindset is really, I think, and again, I'm biased, but really helpful when it comes to humanitarian missions, disaster relief missions in conflict areas or just disaster areas. It's comfortable for military members. It's also something they feel like they can really have immediate impact. You bring food to a kid that's starving, you have immediate impact. There's nothing political about it, right? To your point, I get that people, we are a politically charged environment, but feeding a starving kid, there's nothing, in my view, political about it. It's just doing the right thing and taking your skills and applying it there. Now, I'm not saying it's perfectly easy that every humanitarian has just opened their arms and said, thank God, you commandos have decided to get into our area. And I think Worth can attest that hasn't been the case all the time. We get kind of odd accusations like we're really there just to, do something other than humanitarian work, which is not the case. But I hope that as more vets get into this, that their actions speak for themselves, right? Where we don't have to defend ourselves all the time. We just say, well, they eventually say, hey, you guys are doing a lot of good and we're really happy you're here. But anyway, so I do think, to the extent we can talk to veterans that are looking for purpose after their military service, which obviously had a lot of purpose, that they do consider this, whether it's with us or any of the other groups out there. Their skills, I think, are sorely needed, and they can have an immediate impact for people who desperately need that impact in their lives, like children going hungry.
And I think it's important too, just Carey, you've kind of made this reference a couple times, about whether it's not in a soft capacity or soft this, that. I'm very conscious that, soft remains the flavor of the week right now for a certain sector of the population. And that, it carries a panache that some people absolutely trade on, in their civilian life. The fact of the matter, and a thing that I've been very aware of, well before I retired, and in fact, I retired out of the Marine Raider support group. So most definitively saw the value and importance of the folks that made the world go round, both operationally, logistically, intelligentially. I just made a word up, et cetera. But I worked with exceedingly high caliber folks. And I would also say, I verbalized this about 3 months ago. For years, you live with that whole thing. Amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics. Well, and there's always who's the big guy in the room is the operator, whether that means, the staff operations section or whether that means the hairy knuckle guy with the gun. But we have a guy that works with us was an enlisted 0369 in the Marine Corps, which is an infantry unit leader. He was a company gunnery sergeant in a rifle company. And they are the logistics specialists really for the rifle company. They're the folks that make the training and the gear happen. And it is a career point. He then commissioned and became a logistics officer. And he's been the crux guy throughout all of this. The rest of us are basically working in direct support to his efforts, if the truth, if the truth is really known. And I eventually was able to say, yeah, amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics, but now our operation is logistics. It is finding a way to move food, shelter, electrical, heavy equipment to move and crush rubble. And so my ability to write an operations order is helpful only in the way that it organizes thought, and only in the way that it is able to provide that thought to somebody who's going to receive it and say, yes, I do want to contribute to this effort, either financially or with effort. So I think it's real important to note to all the folks that are out there. Yeah, most of the folks on the name line at Fogbow have a common background, but it probably could have just as easily been a bunch of logistics officers or a bunch of intelligence officers. We just happen to know each other, and had to bring in folks like Roger, who is the logistics guru.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up because, well, I mean, as we were also talking about offline when we were talking about another organization that we're both involved with, is that uh, a lot of times the folks that struggle the most coming out of the military from a mental health standpoint are those of us that served in a support capacity. And in a weird way, it's because I think, I don't know, let me rephrase that because it's not weird. From my perspective, as I continue to work through that and wrestle with that, it is because we're not supporting anything anymore, right? Like our mission was clear, while it wasn't as dangerous directly as yours, it was still very, very clear. That purpose was day to day. Like it was minute to minute, hour to hour, shift to shift, right? Like we knew what we were doing, we knew why we were doing it, we knew what needed to be done, and it was just like clockwork. And then you get out of the military, and you're responsible for your schedule, you're responsible for your purpose, you're responsible for your 20 square feet within whatever organization that you're working for, and the clarity of purpose might not be as clear from that CEO, as it is from your commanding officer at the 455th Expeditionary Squadron. You know what I mean? Like it's just so it's a really, really good point, and it's one I just obviously try to maintain respect across all the different branches and different MOSs, and not trying to overstate or understate anybody's roles in anything. It's just they are different, and in this capacity, it can be more difficult for support troops.
Yeah, I think absolutely. Now, I think that points to a big problem we have collectively, which is this whole downward comparison issue that we have. We vaunt somebody up and we necessarily push somebody else down. And my only question has become, how did you do what you did? Because again, I've recognized that I am very much the quote support guy within Fogbow. In many different ways. And our guy, Roger, is the guy who's frequently been forward for extended periods of time, engaging with the local forces, as it were, developing the logistics change, making things move, shaking hands, kissing babies. And so I recognize that reality. And so we need to get away as a veterans community away from the I was just a, or yeah, well, but I wasn't a, and I do it too. So if I completely qualify my experience, I say I have one combat deployment and 2 deployments to combat zones. And I was at Bagram twice, just like you. I drank a lot of coffee. I had my own chew on my second deployment. It was very comfortable, other than the Sea Whiz that was mounted on the roof that would shoot down the incoming rockets. But that was the worst experience I had, was getting woken up by a Sea Whiz that shot down the rockets. I didn't actually take any real fire. I was laughingly told somebody the other day, the most dangerous thing that happened to me on my Afghan deployments was some shrapnel went by close enough for me to hear as I was on my way into a KBR chow line to get some really sweet ice cream. It's just the reality. So I don't ever want to overstate my own story. And a kid who was driving a truck around the ring road for a deployment saw vastly more danger and vastly more war story than I did in Afghanistan, or at least that wasn't on a screen. I saw a fair bit of things on a screen from remote stuff, but again, none of that matters, right? Or it shouldn't matter. I really look to the World War II generation for some instruction on this. I'm not a guy who just instinctively took, oh, they're the greatest generation, but they did know how to veteran. And I have watched, I think it's hot now. I'm with you. I don't want to talk politics at all, but I am watching vets tear vets apart over who's the most veteran, who's the right kind of veteran, who did the right kind of things. When meanwhile, we ought to be coming together to go, hey, there's lots of problems in the world. How can we use the experiences, the skills, and the qualifications that we have to make them better?
Right.
As a field grade officer for, let me think 1 second, for 17 years. I'm still not very good at PowerPoint or Excel, but I'm good enough to use them to have some effect. There's nothing sexy about what I do for Fogbow, but it helps build plans that, the sexy logistics guy can put into play that feed people. that aren't going to have food otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's like if the focus is purpose, right? What can I control, and how can I respond within the parameters of my experience and interest? Then the rest of it doesn't matter, because then if you're focused that way, and Mick, you're focused that way, and I'm focused that way, well, then the three of us are coming together for a common purpose, and we have complementary skill sets that are going to move towards that purpose. We're not focused on who has what skill sets, just like on any small unit, right? Like I worked on a small unit, the 3-man load crew on fighters. You all worked in small unit teams when you're downrange. We all have complementary skill sets. We're all working towards the same goal. And I'm not worried about, I was a 3-man. I'm not worried about what my 1-man can do and what my 2-man can do. I just know that they can do it, and they're going to do it. And I'm going to bring my skill set to bear. We're going to get that jet loaded. It's going to come back Winchester. We're going to do it again. So as long as we're focused on the purpose, we can ignore the rest of that noise. I'd love to speak a little bit about build. Like what's it been like to build this organization? And how did you get started in it? Both of you get brought to it. And what's it been like to build it to the capacity where it's at now? And what are the steps to take it wherever you want to take it next?
Well, I'd start by saying it was me and Sam Mundy, so retired 3-star Marine general, great friend of both Worth and mine. And he and I were the ones that talked to the owners essentially at the beginning, talking about this concept. And it was, when we heard the whole thing, we're like, wow, so you want us to basically create, and it was a maritime-based entity, basically create a do-gooder Marine Corps, right? It was like, it's like the perfect job. And then, of course, we reached out to our friends and primarily Lobo folks and put it together. So that was the original concept. I actually hope we get back to that. Gaza is kind of, I don't want to say sidetracked this, because it's definitely a purposeful mission that's really proven, I think, our concept. I think we have done some good there. And we're looking at expanding Sudan, other areas of conflict, to show that we can do some good there as well. And as War said, it's mostly the skills is the logistics. So the logistics now is the main effort. Roger Thompson is our MVP, if you will, right? And he's used to most of his career, other than when he was in the infantry side, has been supporting, right? So now the skill sets we have are primarily in need or support. So logistics and soon to be medical, but operational planning, and also how to stay safe in a conflict zone. That's another thing I'd point out is that's a skill set we bring in naturally. When you're moving into a conflict zone, you have to coordinate, for example, right? If you don't, bad things happen. So we know that intuitively. A lot of humanitarians don't. A lot of humanitarians have issues with coordination, where we, I think, naturally understand that it's part of keeping your folks alive. So the concept, I think, came together with that. But I don't want to downplay the role in our group that humanitarians also play, right? So we're different in the sense that we bring in mostly soft veterans, but we also do have former UN, and we do have, award-winning NGO founders who come from that side. And it's really the combination, I think, that helps make us impactful. Again, we're a little different because of the veterans. And again, I don't want to sugarcoat the fact that some humanitarians don't like military people. And they'll tell you to your face, which is kind of odd. You're kind of surprised. It's like, wow, if it was any other group, you'd never say that, right? But you look right at us and say, I don't like military people. And we do our best to keep, the mediator side contained. But that's, I think, will change not by arguing or, any of that, flipping tables or anything like that, but just by persistent delivery of humanitarian efforts in areas that need it, until they go, well, damn, these guys are here to stay and they can do some good. But again, our, I think, secret sauce, if you will, is the combination of humanitarians and military. It's not just because we have a lot of military.
And Mick just said a word that you had also alluded to, Carey, that I think is critical, that, the veterans tend to have in spades, which is persistence. Mick has said initially we thought we were basically going to build a humanitarian Marine Corps. And honestly, that was an easier task for me. I know how to build a force. I know, and I've been blessed to work, again, with some really capable support people who taught me how to do it. I've got a good friend who's a Army operational research and statistics analysis guy. Now, he was a combat guy. He had a lot of fighting time in Iraq in the early days. And then when he made a career shift as a field grade, and he's a numbers and Excel guy and a guy who can just make a plan using ones and zeros, and it tell you how you're going to win the war. But in learning all of that, what we've done at Fogbow over and over again, and honestly, we did this during the Kabul evacuation too. Our little group motto during Kabul was just one more. We got one Afghan out. Let's get just one more. And we've then turned that here to, there's honestly, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn, there was so much we didn't know at the outset of this. And Mick has talked about working with the humanitarian community, and we're blessed to have two humanitarians on staff, Chris Hislop and Jasmine Muffard, who have as much experience in that world as we do in the military and intelligence world, and who will frequently say to us, "Hey guys, you think it's going to go this way, but let me tell you how it's actually going to play on the ground if you do that." And we go, okay, fine, back up, replan, recock, re-engage. And then we run into somebody who says, "I don't like military people. I'm not going to support you." Okay, cool. Back up, replan, recock, re-engage. Oh, we did find somebody. I mean, I will say I have, and I want to be real clear, the preponderance of my work happens right here at this desk in North Carolina, right? I'm not some He-Man dude out there getting it done on the ground. I'm a guy typing on a keyboard. And that persistence is just, okay, we have 1,100 tons of flour. We have people in Gaza who desperately need the flour to put into their bodies because of the roughly 2 million Gazans. About 1.7 million of them are internally displaced and or starving and or in critical wasting. They need this food that we bought. And we get stymied on moving the food to the starving people. And, a military tendency is not to go, I guess it's just not going to happen. It's, how is this going to happen? It's not going to happen that way. How are we going to make this work? And I will note, like, that flour is now, after a lot of effort and a lot of negotiation and a lot of, I guess we're going to take a right turn instead of a left turn, it's moving to people that need it. And that matters. That really, and another military factor that has been great with Fogbow is, it's the old, it's amazing what you can accomplish when nobody cares who gets credit. We have said in fact, we've done it. Like, we bought all this flour to move for people, and then one of our humanitarian partners says, it's really better if we get bags that don't have any kind of markings on them. Okay, cool. Take all the markings off. We don't need the credit. We just need to get the work done. And I think that's a commonality that all of us learned in the military. I don't care whether you hung bobs, made gravy in the chow hall, or, threw throwing stars at SEAL Team 6.
Yeah, I mean, that's the old cliche of one team, one fight. Like, it's true for a reason, right? And it's back to purpose, and it's, I think, persistence and resilience. You're right. Where it's when I fully transitioned into my civilian career working in advertising, I was shocked at how similar these things were, right? Because, like, as you're describing logistics, I'm like, yeah, no, I saw the flight line in a marketing organization, and then in an advertising agency, and then with a production company. I'm like, oh, we just do this, and get this person. Oh, this person just needs something from me. I get them, that they do the job. I don't have to worry about it and move things around. And then I got to a certain part of the job where I was just shocked at how similar it was, and then I was shocked at how different it was. All these people want credit for all these. I'm like, no, we just executed a $2 million production and got a campaign done. Who cares who did what? Like, we did it, and that was a shocking thing for me. And I think that can be a shocking thing for a lot of veterans, as they can bring certain skill sets to bear, not just the door kicking and wrench turning ones, but these mindset ones. And then they're like, oh, I can execute here, but then they kind of come up against this a different culture that they're not used to working in a civilian environment.
I think it's those base skills that everyone learns, or hopefully everyone learns, or already has and gets developed, that matter the most. Again, no one, I started my life in the Marine Corps in a sniper platoon. I then spent a bunch of time in Force Recon, and then I spent the last 16 years of my career in SOCOM. And since I retired in 2021, not only has no one asked me to, no one has cared about an offset hey-ho insert into a 12-click movement. But I've absolutely had people utilize the fact that I have a law degree, as does Mick, to read some contracts and offer some opinions. I've never had to pull a trigger except in my role as an outdoors writer who goes hunting for a living from time to time. But I absolutely have had to ask Roger, our logistics expert, like, dude, I have no idea how we would move this stuff. And he goes, oh, it's pretty easy. Here you go. And he just kind of starts laying it out. And then I can back plan from that, right? But it's all of those capabilities, and I think it's important for vets to understand that unless you're one of these guys who, I hung it up on Friday and I showed back up on Monday in khakis and started doing the same job again, your skill set is not necessarily relevant so much as your will set. I just made that up. I'm going to probably patent that. But what you've got the will to do and the will to endure and the will to affect is what you learned as a military person, as a fire team leader to a brigade commander.
Yeah, and I would just second that. I mean, a lot of what we take for granted, if you think about how early on you start learning how to plan operations, right? Like the day you go to Paris Island, you start screaming SMEAC, right? You don't even know what it means, but you learn the situation, mission, execution, all that stuff. That really, when it comes to doing humanitarian support in austere environments, is key. The ability to plan and take into account things that might happen. A lot you don't get that many places, and some of our humanitarians have told us, look, we don't really get trained in logistics. We do logistics, but we don't have a formal course to go to. The military does, because it's so important to the mission that not only have the basic course, they have the advanced course, and it keeps getting more complicated. So by the time a military logistician, just to use them for example, retires, they have a skill set that doesn't really exist any other place. Maybe in Amazon, I don't know, but certainly to that level in a austere conflict environment, I don't know who else has that skill. Even humanitarians, they'll tell us, and Worth has mentioned ours, have told us, like, I have done logistics, but nobody told me how to do it. I just learned it on the job as a humanitarian. Our guys come out with, formalized training in how to do this, and I think they really had impact. And for all the door kickers, if you will, the soft folks who say, well, I don't know where my skill sets would fall in this. It is, as Werther said, the will set, right? It's the will to get things done no matter what the circumstances, right? It's the answer isn't take your ball and go home. It is to figure out. That is definitely in the soft community, what I've seen in the military and in my old organization. It's the will to get it done. It's the ability to operationally plan. It's the ability to be safe in environments, even though there's not that many people there and you don't have to Death Stars, for example, like you do in the military. That whole skill set really comes into play, and being a team player, right? That's not necessarily inherent in every individual or organization out there, but it is for the most part in every military member. So here's the other part of this I would bring up. Unfortunately, humanitarian issues, crises, are only getting worse. Right? We're not in a period where it's going to subside. Right? We have a huge population. We have, believe it or not, climate change. Again, not to get political, but it's happening, and what it's doing is causing people to have to migrate because there's no food there anymore. Right? So all of this is adding up to more crises in the world that need to be addressed. Period. Or it's coming to your doorstep. Right? If you can't go there and help people there, they're going to, and just like we would, get up and come to you. Right? They're not going to let their families starve to death. Right? So not just conflicts, but actual environmental crises. And if we don't have veterans doing this effectively or humanitarians, then the U.S. military is going to have to do all this. Right? So I think we're providing a service not only to the people that are getting it, which is only going to get more significant, I think. We're also allowing the folks that would then be called on to do it for sure, not to have to do it as much, potentially. So we're contributing to a crisis that is going to be addressed by the world, or it's going to come to your doorstep, I think, where it needs to be addressed, which is where they live.
Yeah, we're so privileged in the West, right? Not to use another triggering political zeitgeist word, but like we are, right? And deploy a bunch of times, and then you come home, to America and to the West and to all these things that we have, and it's easy to forget what's happening in other places, right? You're probably not going to forget what happened in the places that you went, but it's easy to forget and to be out of sight, out of mind, with what's happening in other places in the world and these emerging conflicts and emerging disasters and emerging situations that we can prevent from becoming disasters, right? And what we do here, it seems, is we focus so much on high level purpose. Like, what is my life purpose? What is my, what am I doing now that I'm out of the military or out of the intelligence community? Like, what's this pie in the sky 10, 15, 25-year plan, instead of like, well, how can I live my purpose today? How can I be purposeful today? What can I control today that I can then contribute to, and making that smaller and chunking it down, instead of I got caught doing that quite a bit coming out of the military, where I'm like, oh wow, I actually need to really narrow what I'm focusing on down to what I need to do this morning, and then this afternoon, and then tonight, and then I'll worry about tomorrow, tomorrow morning as I face it. And so it seems to me, as you're describing, it's like this is a great opportunity for people to kind of reset and say, all right, well, where can I go affect some change and live some purpose in the world where people need it? Yes, we have inflation here. Yes, we have issues here. I'm not dismissing the things that the working class are dealing with in this country right now, but there are lots of other opportunities where people can go fix an immediate problem, where people don't have the things that we have.
Yep. Yeah, very true.
What are some of the big challenges that you've encountered, that you are encountering? You'd also mentioned wanting to kind of, and it's an interesting one, right? Gaza is an interesting one because you had said, sidetrack, but not, because it's important. You want to kind of get back to some other things, but as you operate within this organization and in the world, how do you manage all of these emerging opportunities to do good, and how do you look forward to that and plan for that?
So we talked a little bit about some of the pushback. We don't want to over exaggerate it, but with who we are, right? Alternative methods or means for why we're there, which aren't true. We're obviously there for humanitarian stuff. And this is a very politically charged environment, which we're not political at all, but we're in a politically charged environment, from, oh, you guys are feeding Hamas, to, which are obviously not. We wouldn't do what we're doing if it wasn't approved by the Israelis, right? Or you guys are just doing the bidding of the Israelis, right? Because they want the maritime corridor, for example, in Gaza, vice the ground corridor. We're doing neither. We're there to assist wherever we can. So those are all challenges. And maybe when we go to Sudan, still politically charged, but not as much as Gaza, or Haiti, we'll be able to show that we are really there to take our skill sets and hopefully do good. That's it, right? So that's one of the challenges I think we've faced. The other one is there's a lot of countries out there that talk a lot, but when it comes down to do little. We've seen it over and over again. They have conferences and big fancy 5-star hotels, and but very little comes out of it. So I think it would be really helpful for us and every humanitarian out there if people started, putting their actions and their resources to where their mouth is. If you're not going to do anything about it, but use it to propagate whatever political standpoint you have, you're really not part of the solution. You're just propagating the problem. Again, we're not political, so we stay out of that, but we see it because it's like, I don't know how many countries we've briefed. I think it's over 50, believe it or not. People who are totally willing to hear our hour-long description of what we want to do, but not contribute. I hope they do change their mind. I hope they do contribute. I hope we can do more with it, or if not to us, other groups, right? There's plenty of groups out there. It's not. This isn't about us. This is about vets getting involved in these humanitarian issues, where I think they could make a lot of good.
And I think, as you talk about politics, one person's pragmatism may be another person's politics, but I believe that what we're doing, which is, again, it's a private entity. We're not a NGO, is somewhere where you can kind of liberate yourself from the nastiness of modern day politics and still have impact in an arena that is obviously so affected by politics. One of the things when I my first deployment in the GWAT, I was actually an activated reservist. I'd gotten out of the Marine Corps and I was in law school, and I came back from a very kinetic, combat-focused deployment as a force recon guy, and rolled right back into Florida State University College of Law, and I was in a jurisprudence class, which is legal philosophy, which turned into Ask a Military Officer. And somebody said to me, well, like, what if they had told you to invade Mexico? And I go, well, my first question is it legal, moral, and ethical? And if the answer to all three of those is yes, then my next question is, what time does the plane leave and where do I need to be? And what I loved about my 27 years as a both active and reserve Marine was that ability that, the entire national security architecture was pushing me into a point. And if I was in a firefight, which is, obviously a violation, if you ascribe to the 10 Commandments, regardless of how you feel about Judeo-Christian, whatever, thou shalt not kill. You're there to break one of the biggies. But there's 320 million Americans behind you who are pointing you to that thing, and you just happen to be at the sharpest point. Well, likewise, this commercial humanitarian capability is, I only care what the policy is because of what it allows or disallows me to do, and who is in the approvals chain for me to be able to feed a baby. Because that's what I'm there to do, is feed a baby. Now, I have, a quarter century's worth of experience, and some people like Sam have, a third of a century's experience dealing with peeling back all those layers of approvals and requirements and asking the mother may I's, etc. But the end is, I get to focus entirely on the end result, which is get flour to starving people in Gaza. Or if it's not flour, turning to the humanitarians and going, okay, what's a more, culturally appropriate, or what just doesn't spoil? I mean, again, this is why it's so great to have the logistics capability, guys. I'd have been like, I don't know, buy some flour, get it there. Meanwhile, Roger says, well, it needs to be wrapped this way. And you got to think about when we load it on the ships, if we're moving it across the ocean, it's got to be plastic wrapped. Well, I don't know, just a million variables. So I've learned so much stuff in the last I think almost 200 days of doing this, that reminds me of the Marine Corps with a lot of the annoying bits removed. And that part is really cool. And I think, if somebody needs a sense of purpose, anybody who thinks your purpose was met every day in a fast and efficient manner in the military is gilding the lily in their memory. The truth of the matter is, most days I got up, and if I moved the ball a millimeter forward that day, or I was able to help Lance Corporal Jones out at home or whatever, that's a victory. And same here. We're just having tiny incremental victories that have enormous impact on the far end.
And if I could add, Carey, the other thing that I think vets have is the ability to talk to each other in a way that has credibility. So, kind of a funny story, I guess, but I get on a plane, headed out to the region. I happen to be sitting next to a pretty senior politician who I know, who is a vet, right? And he knows that I'm an analyst in ABC, so he starts saying, he goes right into, this effort, the Maritime Corps, not knowing that I had anything to do with it. Talking about feeding terrorists, and this is only going to be terrorists and all that stuff. And he goes through this long diatribe, and then he looks at me and he says, well, what are you and Eric doing? Eric Ulrich, retired SEAL. He's our chief operating officer for Fogbow. And I said, well, I guess we're feeding terrorists right now. So it was a long, awkward pause, and he was like, what? And then I started explaining it, right, in a way that cut through the, political bylines and stuff. And to his credit, he was like, well, damn, I didn't know there was that many vets doing this. So then he was listening a little more, not because of me or Eric, but just, he was like, well, you guys aren't who I thought would be behind this. And then I think by the end of it, and I can't speak for this guy, but I think we won over somebody, put it that way. At least somebody who was hard no, this is not what we should be doing, to, well, maybe we should be doing it. Well, I do think I've come off my belief that we're actually, feeding terrorists to the point of to Worth's point. We're just trying to feed babies. I mean, it's the core. I think it's the core mission in any human's life is to feed babies, right? And I think, having sat on a plane for him for 6 hours, we got there. But I don't know if he would have we would have had that kind of discussion, quite frankly, if we both didn't come from that community.
And that
Oh,
that really points to something I call the barracks dichotomy, and I think it gets lost even amongst vets when they transition out. I use myself as an example. If I describe myself professionally as a retired Marine Raider who now writes about hunting and fishing for a living, and who owns more guns than I actually know, like I have to pile them in my gun case now because people give them to me. That creates an image in some people's mind that fits perfectly with what I ought to be as a Marine. If I then turn to you and say, I've been married for 21 years to a woman who was the lead attorney for the American Civil Liberties Union of North Carolina, and who is a pretty liberal person, and my kid's pretty liberal, and I'm a writer who lives in the suburbs in a nice neighborhood. That creates an entirely different impression in your mind of exactly who I must be. But the truth of the matter is I'm all of those things, and it's the barracks dichotomy of the kid who came from South Central Los Angeles living with the goat roper from Oklahoma, and they go out on Friday night and they go to the same bar because the beer is cheap there, and maybe they argue. I mean, I've watched, amazing arguments while sitting somewhere at a range or something by guys who will also run across a street under fire to grab the guy that they were accusing of being, an enemy of America 20 minutes before. But that's a recreational argument in that environment, not a serious argument. We've gotten to a point in the country where I think we're starting to cement and act like that's a serious argument about identity, when again, I'm all of those identities, and all of those identities can agree that feeding babies is a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on. My personal, like the best kind of cultural and political education I got was my 4 years in the military, being exposed to people from four corners of this country and all the way in between. And I witnessed the exact same thing. And I participated in those, right? Like I had strong feelings and beliefs, still do. They're more loosely held now because of these experiences, but they're still strong. But I had strong beliefs, and then we would argue, and then I would change my mind or change somebody else's mind or just adjust it slightly and kind of have these conversations, this pushback, because we did have that shared foundation, in the Air Force of basic military training and then tech school. And then we kind of had all these shared hardship experiences where we knew that, like, oh, that's a really strong foundation for a life and for a friendship and for a relationship and for a colleagueship, to continue the word making uptrend on this episode. And I got out and I have those conversations. They don't go the same way. My wife would be like, why are you can't talk like that. What are you doing? And I'm like, I'm just having a free flowing conversation about some shit that matters. She's like, first of all, it doesn't really matter that much. And second of all, you're not in the military anymore, dude. And I'm like, oh shit, you're right. It's a different environment and a different relationship with people. And I love that barracks dichotomy. I love that. Yeah. So I want to wrap things up, and I want to remain not getting political, but you did bring this up, which I think was helpful to frame the conversation. And Worth, you and I had a cool conversation a couple weekends ago that went in a direction neither one of us were expecting, and it was very different than these civilian conversations that I have. What kind of advice, to put you both on the spot, would you have for military veterans to navigate the politically charged environment that we're in? What can folks focus on, either kind of personally, philosophically, whatever it might be, to kind of stay above it and maybe cut through it and to navigate it when necessary? Because it's getting to a spot again now where it's really, really hard, especially now as the campaign is going the way that it is, where people are having this veteran off. Like, what are your thoughts on what individual members of our community can do to navigate that?
So, I mean, I'm apolitical by nature. I would say this, and not that people are asking me for my advice, but they should really I think about what they believe when it comes to policy and not take any kind of script from any entity like a political party. Because it almost seems like we've gotten to a point where politics, either side, is like a team sport where your side can do no wrong and the other side can do no right. And it's not even about the actual substance of what we're talking about anymore. I mean, you get outraged when the other side does something that your side just did, for example. So I would start with that. Like, hey, none of you don't have a requirement to join either of these teams. You have a requirement, I think, to be an American, right? That's it. I would start with that, and it could work either side, I suppose. And then, of course, since you brought up Carey, the philosophical book, I got to jump on the Stoicism, and I would start with Stoicism, right? So I've been a Stoic since I was a little kid. My dad taught me ethics based on that, and for a long time, Stoicism, nobody knew what it was. I mean, I grew up in the Deep South, and people thought it was like some version of, Southern Baptist. And I used to actually say I was a Stoic. They just look at me weird. Now everybody knows, and that's a good thing, right? And it is very natural for military members. They hear it, they read about it, they realize it's been around for thousands of years, and they go, "Well, hell, that's essentially my mindset. That's what I want to aspire to." And I would, it's not just me pushing Stoicism because I am very heavily involved in the modern movement, but I do see when I talk to veterans about it that it's not only natural, but it changes their perspective on many things, on what matters and what their value is, and how it's not connected to material wealth. It's connected to basically what good you do in the world and how you are as a person. That's your value, not what kind of car you drive, etc. So it does help there. It also helps when it comes to framing the way they think. How do you go about determining whether something's true or not? Well, it isn't because you saw it on Facebook. So what's the big part of original Stoicism is logic, right? Which we don't teach anymore. So that's the second part. The third part that doesn't really carry over that much into modern Stoicism is the spirituality of the original Stoicism. It's not religious necessarily, but it is basically putting yourself in a much broader world, and where your place is in it. It's not the top of the heap. It's just one part. And that's the original Stoics kind of viewed as holistically. And I think it really helps whether you're a religious person or not, because Stoicism can fit for both easily. I would just suggest that veterans are looking for a broader meaning. Not only should they join the humanitarian cause and what we're talking about, but philosophically, whether it's Stoicism or other philosophies or religion, it can be very helpful if you go to the non-political aspects of it.
And I think somebody asked me a very similar question actually this morning, and I think vets have got to stop being vets' worst enemies, and there is no denying, to me anyway. I'm firmly believe there is a political overlay that leads vets to become vets' own worst enemies. You're not vet enough, or you don't vet the right way, or you don't believe. And I hate even referring to memes, but I saw a meme of that photo that came out of whatever that movie is I haven't seen about America has a civil war or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's Jesse Plemons, and he's saying, what kind of reporter are you? But instead it says, what kind of veteran are you? And I have vet friends who are way left of me, and I have vet friends who are way right of me. And I have my best friend who's a prior Marine, who's an investment banker, Republican, and is the godfather of my child and was the best man at my wedding. And in about a month, I'm going to be out in the woods hunting deer with a dude for multiple days who describes himself as a militant socialist. So the ability to move back and forth between different communities by focusing on what commonalities we have and what I like about them matters. I think anytime you start thinking, why can't these people see it? Then you probably ought to look inside and see what you're missing too. I think veterans tend to be like, or a certain sector of our population tends to be like crabs in a bucket. And, it's the old thing. When one crab starts escaping out of the bucket, the other crabs reach up and drag him back down. And look, I won't lie to you. There's veterans out there who are doing things in a way that I don't think is correct. So you know what I do? I just let them do their thing, and I focus in on doing what I think is correct. And somebody may well think I'm completely wrong, which is awesome because this is America and you're allowed to do that, and in fact encouraged to do so. But I think anytime you're starting to get outraged, you probably ought to wonder how you're being manipulated or how you're manipulating yourself. And I think that matters too. And what I find, going back to what, Mick was talking about a little bit about, you accept things from your team, you don't accept from the other team. Well, you receive outrage in a way that is often binary. We all of us receive outrage in a way that is binary. So anytime I start being outraged about whatever some group that perhaps I'm predisposed to not think is doing things correctly, I then start going, okay, why do you have that assumption? What is driving your impression about that? And are you being manipulated by, quote, your own side? Very possibly yes. Very probably yes. And I actually, part of that whole psych screening thing I was talking about earlier, I don't like being manipulated by anybody. And I said to my dad the other day, I don't like being told. Like, don't tell me. I don't want to be told by anybody anymore. I was told for almost 3 decades how things were going to be. I don't want to be told. I want to derive my own opinions, and I want to create space for you to derive your own opinions. And I want us to try and develop some common reality that allows for the fact that we will have different opinions. But I think coming to some shared reality is going to be very, very critical for our nation over the next 10 to 20 years, because that's what we've yet to figure out. Now, 20, 25 years into the internet and the democratization of platform and the democratization of ability to offer opinion, we now have very definitively different views of reality, which I'll say this and then I'll shut up. Again, an old Marine friend from many, many years ago responded politically to something that I had said and said, well, the choice is this or this. And we explained what his perception of the choices are. And I said, even if someone had a philosophical or political opinion that is exactly and in perfect contravention of yours, they could follow your exact same analysis to say why you're wrong. Doesn't make your analysis incorrect. It just means that it's not particularly dispositive, but we better all understand the truth of it, if that makes any sense. And I think, create space for people to be both right and wrong at the same time. I frequently am.
Yeah, it's the only successful way to be a human, and I think it's the only successful way to be an American, citizen. It's love him or hate him. Jordan Peterson said something years ago. I think one of his appearances on Bill Maher, and he was kind of speaking as a Canadian. He was like, I've spent a lot of time in this country now talking to people at high levels of government on both sides. He's like, you do all understand that you can't get divorced. Like, you already fought a civil war. Like, you can't get divorced. So there's an equal and opposite position on the other side. You have to figure out how to interact with each other. And on that, I heard Vivek Ramaswamy interviewed Mark Cuban for his podcast because they were going back and forth on Twitter and arguing about a bunch of left-right stuff with, DEI and climate change and all these different things. And so I was like, I'll listen to that and kind of see what these guys are modeling for that conversation. And it was a really great conversation. It got to a spot where Cuban was, being funny and kind of being himself. And he was like, I've convinced you, right? I changed your mind, didn't I? And Vivek said, no, you didn't. He's like, but what you have done is you've helped me understand your assumptions are different than what I assumed they were. So now we are working towards either a solution or a better understanding of where we disagree from a shared foundation of understanding of each other and of each other's assumptions. And that is going to make for a more successful conversation than set of conversations as we move forward. And I was like, man, what a great model, especially, from somebody who's a surrogate of one of the current campaigns, actually having this conversation and modeling and putting it out there for lots of people. I hope a lot of people hear that, and I hope the right people hear that and start to think, oh, wow, we can actually cut this Gordian knot. We don't actually have to figure out how to untie it. We can cut it and we can move forward together with a shared understanding and shared differences and just figure out how to solve these problems.
Yeah, I just think all of us can by establishing ourselves as, and I'm not a Stoic, but I say that only because I believe words and titles have meaning and mean things. I do read Marcus Aurelius every day in little itty bitty digestible bits, working my way through meditations to understand it, and it does appeal to me. Um, so I think, that ability to parse those ideas and parse those motivations and care about them and ask about them, maybe ask more than we tell, I think are pretty critical. And to take it back into the humanitarian space, as I said, we have learned so much, especially over the last 200 days, about the way we thought we were going to do things and then had to modify and modify and modify and modify to meet reality. Had we been unwilling to adjust our perceptions to the reality we were, we would not be able to accomplish our mission. And I think you can say that about the nation. If we are part of this ongoing experiment in democracy and we value it, then we have to be able to continually adapt our impressions and our opinions. And that's not an argument about, whether the Constitution is a flexible document or written in stone. It's not any of that. It's just understanding where we are in a nation that has 321 million people that need to be served and need to be adjusted for, because we are a nation that also vaunts the individual and individual liberty. And I think that, going back to what I was saying about who am I, depending on the description of me, we got to be open to all of the descriptions of all of us and look for the best in each other, which I think, again, is part of the barracks dichotomy. You can't live in close quarters and assume the worst of the person who sleeps 6 feet from you every single day.
Yeah, well said. Or wrap things up here. Where can folks find you both, follow your work? Where can folks find more information about Fogbow? Where would you like to drive some traffic here on social?
Nick?
So Lobo Institute, we have a website, of course, loboinstitute.org. That's in some ways like the bullpen for Fogbow, but also we do a lot of other stuff. We have a charity that deals with the ending of using children as soldiers, which is a growing issue around the world. We do a lot of other things. People, if you join and you want to, we publish papers. We work in a lot of spheres. It's not just what Fogbow's doing. And then at Fogbow, it has its own website. I think it's getting revamped. But you can follow us on there as well. And I'm sure we both have social media accounts. But those are the big ones: loboinstitute.org and then Fogbow.
Yeah, I like hearing from folks very much. And as in my writer life, likes, shares, and contacts are like oxygen. So I have a Instagram called Book War, where the O's are zeros. So B00KWAR. I largely talk about conflict books in there, or books that friends have written and I'm trying to push. You also can find me at Lethal Minds Journal, where I'm the editor-in-chief, and that's a For Vets by Vets publication, and it's a place where you can put those ideas and concepts and policy opinions out there and we kind of design it for the E1 to O3 community to be the voice of the barracks. So, at Lethal Minds Journal, at Book War, will certainly get me. And then I have a really out-of-date website, which is russellworthparker.com. I think I updated it right after the Kabul evacuation, and anything I've written since then is in the ether. But I love to hear from folks.
Awesome. Love it. I do ask an open-ended question to end each episode. That last segment that we did, I think, kind of covered it, but I still want to ask, just in case there's anything we want to add. But what's on your heart and your mind for our community right now? Could be a piece of advice, something you want to get off your chest, or something you want to reiterate from what we've talked about today. But what is on your heart? What's on your mind? Mick, we'll start with you.
So, I mean, we mentioned this early on, right? What, 22 vets commit suicide a day now? I think that does have, and you guys have already articulated, but I think it's worth articulating again. It's because I think a lot of people lose purpose. A lot of veterans lose purpose. So the first thing we should be pushing for people to do and assisting them in getting is that purpose. And hopefully some people out there who might have lost that listen to Worth and I today on your podcast and say, damn, man, maybe I can do something in this arena. because you will have huge impact, and your skills matter, and what you can do matters, and people out there need it. So if that is something you're inclined to do, I believe you'll find that purpose, and I believe you will make a difference, whether it's in our group or another group, or you start your own group. Right? There's no risk of too many people trying to help people around the world. We are far from that being a problem, and I hope we get to that point where it's too many people trying to help people in the world. So I would end with that, at least, and toss it over to Worth. If you are looking for a purpose, you can find it in doing things like this.
Yeah, I would double that, and I would say, veteran suicide is not my mission in life, as it is for some folks, very rightly. But that being said, within my own little recon raider community, we lost 7 people last month, who either were guys I knew or were friends of guys I know. And that's a lot. That's a heavy drumbeat in one 30-day period, and it got my attention, and I did write about it for Lethal Minds last month. But I would double down on purpose and say, for me, the way I have found something, I always say I wanted to find something I found as cool as telling people about an offset hey-ho at a cocktail party. And for me, that's been writing. And so I volunteer at the same traumatic brain injury clinic I came out of, which is the Intrepid Spirit Clinic at Camp Lejeune. 6 times a year, I teach a 4-week writing therapy class as part of the traumatic brain injury curriculum. So I'm doing that. Typically, it ends up being folks out of my old community just because of the location. And then I do 2 8-week class therapy experiences, whatever the right word is, online via Zoom. We're about to start one September 4th. That is open to any and all vets. That's it. If you're a vet and you want to do it, it's free. You log on to Zoom for 90 minutes once a week, and we work through some stuff. And the mechanism by which we do it is writing. So I think finding that mission, finding that purpose, which that's become a big part of mine when I'm not trying to help Mick feed kids in areas around the world, has been huge for me. And I like focusing in on my fellow vets. So there's just not there's plenty of room for hands in this problem.
Yeah, no doubt. Gentlemen, appreciate your time, appreciate your work. Worth, appreciate you making this connection and making this episode happen, and look forward to continuing it.
Absolutely. Always enjoy it.
Cheers, fellas.
Thanks, guys.
Bye now.
Cheers.